Rome, 1982. Men dressed as priests walk the cobbled streets near the Vatican, their faces calm, their posture humble. But under their black cassocks, they hide Beretta pistols and a photograph of a face memorized to the smallest scar. They are not clergymen, they are Mossad operatives on the hunt for one of the most dangerous terrorists alive. This is the covert mission that blurred the lines between sacred sanctuary and lethal pursuit, a story of patience, precision, and the relentless reach of intelligence agencies. The man they seek is Abu Nidal, though that is not the name he was born with. He is a genius of terror, whose organization has killed hundreds across Europe and the Middle East. He has planned bombings, assassinations, and airline hijackings. He has attacked diplomats, civilians, and children. Now, after months of surveillance, Israeli intelligence has learned he will be in Rome for a secret meeting with Italian arms dealers. The operation to eliminate him is codenamed Divine Intervention, a dark joke among operatives who have prepared for weeks. They have studied Rome's layout, its churches, its escape routes. They have learned the rhythms of the Vatican, the schedules of priests, the movements of tourists, and they have adopted the only disguise that grants them invisibility in a city teeming with clergy. The black cassock and white collar of Catholic priests. What follows is an operation that mixes meticulous planning with sudden violence, patience with precision. It is a tale of how intelligence agencies turn urban landscapes into hunting grounds, how operatives vanish so completely into their roles that even those looking for them see nothing suspicious, and how a man who believed himself untouchable found that no sanctuary, not even the shadow of the Vatican, could protect him from the reach of Israeli retribution. Abu Nidal was born as Sabri Khalil al-Banna in May 1937 in Jaffa, then part of the British Mandate in Palestine. His family was wealthy. His father was a prosperous Orange Grove merchant who owned property and employed dozens of workers. The War of 1948 changed everything. The family fled to the West Bank, then under Jordanian control, losing their land, wealth, and social status in the chaos of displacement. The humiliation of becoming refugees, living in camps, and depending on UN rations shaped the young Sabri's worldview. Later, he would say that the loss of Palestine was not just a political event, but a personal wound that never healed. In the 1950s, he joined the Ba'ath Party, drawn to its pan-Arab nationalist ideology and its promise to restore Arab dignity through unity and armed struggle. He was intelligent, charismatic, and ruthless, qualities that attracted the attention of Palestinian militant groups forming after the Nakba of 1948. By the early 1960s, he joined Fatah, the organization of Yasser Arafat, and adopted the nom de guerre Abu Nidal, meaning father of struggle. He quickly rose through the ranks, earning a reputation as an effective organizer and a man willing to use extreme violence to achieve political goals. But Abu Nidal was too radical even for Fatah. In 1974, when Arafat began moving toward a diplomatic strategy that recognized the possibility of coexistence with Israel, Abu Nidal broke away in anger. He viewed any compromise with Israel as betrayal, any negotiations as surrender. He formed his own organization, the Fatah Revolutionary Council, and declared war not only on Israel, but on any Palestinian leader who entertained the idea of peace. Over the next decade, his organization carried out some of the most brutal terrorist attacks in modern history. In 1982, Abu Nidal's operatives attempted to assassinate Shlomo Argov, Israel's ambassador to the United Kingdom. Argov survived but was left paralyzed. The attack provoked Israel's invasion of Lebanon, an escalation Abu Nidal deliberately triggered to undermine Arafat's diplomatic efforts and drag the Palestinian cause back into armed conflict. In 1985, his operatives hijacked Egyptair Flight 648, killing 60 passengers when Egyptian commandos stormed the plane. In 1986, his men attacked the Neve Shalom synagogue in Istanbul, killing 22 worshippers with grenades and automatic weapons during Sabbath services. He bombed cafes in Paris, shot passengers in airports in Rome and Vienna, and orchestrated the murder of diplomats across Europe. Intelligence agencies on several continents tracked him, but Abu Nidal was a ghost. He constantly moved, using false identities and protected by regimes that found him useful. Syria sheltered him for years, then expelled him when his presence became diplomatically inconvenient. Muammar Gaddafi of Libya provided him with funding, training camps, and safe houses. Iraq welcomed him when he was useful for operations against Iranian or Syrian targets. He lived in luxury, protected by bodyguards, isolated by layers of security that made direct action against him nearly impossible. Mossad placed him on its list of highest priority targets, but killing Abu Nidal was not simply a matter of finding him and pulling the trigger. He was too well protected, too cautious, too aware that multiple intelligence agencies wanted him dead. Any operation against him would require months of surveillance, infiltration of his networks, and perfect timing. For years, Mossad watched and waited, gathering intelligence, mapping his movements, identifying vulnerabilities. Then, in the spring of 1982, an opportunity arose. Israeli intelligence learned through a source inside Abu Nidal's organization that he planned a trip to Rome. The purpose was a meeting with Italian arms dealers who could supply weapons for operations across Europe. The meeting was scheduled for late June, and Abu Nidal was to travel with minimal security, believing that Rome's complexity and his meticulous operational security made him unreachable. The intelligence was specific enough to act: dates, locations, and communication protocols. Mossad leadership sanctioned Operation Divine Intervention. The planning phase took weeks. Mossad's operational division, working with Caesarea, the unit responsible for targeted killings, studied every detail of Rome's geography and security environment. They identified Abu Nidal's likely routes, his possible accommodations, and places where he might meet his contacts. They analyzed the patrol patterns of Roman police, the placement of surveillance cameras, and the presence of Italian intelligence services that might detect foreign operatives conducting covert operations. The decision to use clerical garb as disguise was not random. Rome presented unique operational challenges. It was a major European capital with sophisticated security services. Italian intelligence cooperated with Israeli counterparts on some matters, but would not tolerate an assassination on Italian soil without prior permission, which Israel would not request because official knowledge would create diplomatic complications. The city was crowded, monitored by surveillance, and full of plainclothes police watching for suspicious behavior. But Rome also offered a unique advantage: the Vatican. The city contained thousands of priests, monks, and nuns who moved freely through the streets, entered buildings without suspicion, and gathered in public places without attracting attention. Clerical robes functioned as social camouflage, providing invisibility through ubiquity. People saw priests and registered them as background elements of the urban landscape, not as individuals requiring scrutiny. Mossad planners recognized that operatives disguised as priests could conduct surveillance, follow targets, and position themselves for action, without triggering the defensive awareness that men in suits or casual clothes might provoke. The disguise also provided psychological cover for the operatives themselves. Fully adopting a role reduces the stress of maintaining a false identity. When everyone you encounter expects you to be a priest, acting like a priest becomes natural, not performative. 6 operatives were selected for the mission. All were veterans of Caesarea with experience in deep cover and the psychological discipline needed to inhabit false identities under stress. They spoke Italian fluently, were familiar with Catholic rituals, and capable of maintaining priestly personas convincingly enough to pass casual interactions with real clergy. Mossad's training department prepared them for weeks of immersion in Catholic culture, studying liturgy, learning prayers in Latin, and practicing the manners and posture of priests. The team arrived in Rome individually over a 10-day period in early June. They used different points of entry: airports in Milan and Naples, train stations in Florence, traveling on legitimate European passports created by Mossad's document fabrication unit. Their legends were as members of a Catholic missionary organization visiting Rome for a conference on interfaith dialogue. The organization existed, and its real members were unaware that Israeli operatives were using its name. They settled in modest hotels near the Vatican, establishments that catered to clergy and where a priest checking in alone would be unremarkable. They attended Mass at different churches, established routines of morning walks and evening prayers, and became familiar faces in neighborhoods where anonymity was impossible. Their inconspicuous presence was easily achieved. They ate in restaurants frequented by priests, visited bookstores selling theological texts, and spent hours in libraries belonging to religious institutions. The surveillance phase required extraordinary patience. Abu Nidal was due to arrive on June 24, but intelligence could not confirm his exact location or movements until he was physically in the city. Operatives conducted what Israeli intelligence calls environmental preparation, mapping areas where Abu Nidal might operate and identifying positions from which they could observe without being seen. They identified 3 locations where Abu Nidal might meet his contacts: a restaurant in Trastevere known for hosting discreet business meetings, a private social club near Piazza Navona, frequented by arms dealers, and a warehouse on the industrial outskirts where weapons deals often occurred. Mossad's technical department had planted listening devices in the restaurant and club months earlier during a separate operation, providing real-time audio if Abu Nidal used these places. On June 23, Abu Nidal arrived in Rome using a Libyan diplomatic passport under the name Ahmad Hassan. He was met at Fiumicino Airport by an Italian contact who drove him to a villa in the suburbs, a safe house owned by a shell company linked to Libyan intelligence. Israeli surveillance, operating from a rented apartment across the street, confirmed his presence through telephoto photography. Images were transmitted to Mossad headquarters in Tel Aviv, where analysts confirmed positive identification. The operations command post was in a small apartment near the Colosseum, rented under the name of a German tourist. Inside, 3 Mossad technicians managed communication equipment that maintained encrypted contact with Tel Aviv and coordinated the movements of the 6 operatives on the ground. The apartment windows were covered with light-proof curtains. Maps of Rome covered the walls, marked with routes, fallback positions, and evacuation points. Abu Nidal's first meeting was scheduled for the evening of June 24 at the restaurant in Trastevere. 2 operatives, both dressed in black cassocks, positioned themselves in a cafe across the street. One read a breviary, the other worked on a sermon he pretended to write. Both wore small earpieces disguised as hearing aids, receiving updates from the command post on Abu Nidal's movements. At 7:45 p.m., a black Mercedes arrived, and Abu Nidal emerged with 2 bodyguards, both carrying concealed weapons under their jackets. They entered the restaurant and were escorted to a private dining room on the 2nd floor. Surveillance operatives confirmed his presence and relayed the information. The hit team, waiting 3 blocks away in a van disguised as a church maintenance vehicle, received the order to act. But the operation was aborted at the last moment. Italian police conducting routine patrol parked right in front of the restaurant. The timing was random, not the result of any intelligence about Abu Nidal's presence, but it created an unacceptable risk. An assassination carried out in the presence of police would guarantee immediate pursuit, potentially compromising the entire team. The command post ordered the operatives to withdraw. Abu Nidal left the restaurant 2 hours later, unaware of how close he had come to death. He returned to the villa, and surveillance operatives followed at a distance, confirming his location before pulling back. The missed opportunity was disappointing, but Mossad's operational doctrine emphasized patience. Failed attempts created patterns that targets could recognize. The next opportunity had to succeed. Intelligence intercepts revealed that a second meeting for Abu Nidal would take place on June 26 at the social club near Piazza Navona. This location offered better tactical advantages. The club was on a narrow street with limited vehicle access. For Abu Nidal to enter, he would have to walk about 50 meters from where his car could park. Those 50 meters represented a vulnerability. The plan was revised. 2 operatives would position themselves as street priests, common in Rome, standing near churches collecting donations for charity. A third would be inside a cafe with a direct view of the club's entrance. A fourth would pose as a street vendor selling religious icons and rosaries from a small cart positioned at the corner where Abu Nidal's car would park. The actual liquidation would be carried out by the remaining 2 operatives, who would approach Abu Nidal as he walked to the club, pretending to need directions clarified. At close range, they would draw hidden weapons and open fire. On the morning of June 26, the team took their positions. The street vendor set up his cart at 6 a.m., hours before Abu Nidal's scheduled arrival. He sold crucifixes and small religious items to tourists, establishing himself as an integral part of the street's daily life. The operative in the cafe arrived at 11 a.m., ordering coffee and positioning himself where he could observe both the club entrance and the parking area. At 1:45 p.m., Abu Nidal's Mossad approached. The hit team, waiting in a nearby alley, began moving to the intercept point. Everything was going according to plan. Then Abu Nidal's car stopped 50 meters short of the planned parking spot. The driver, a Libyan security officer trained in counter-surveillance, noticed something that made him tense. Perhaps it was the street vendor whose cart hadn't moved all day. Perhaps it was the too prolonged gaze of the cafe patron toward the street. Whatever the reason, the driver turned around and drove away. The command post ordered an immediate abort. The operatives dispersed, returning to their hotels by different routes. That evening, they gathered in the apartment to analyze what went wrong. The consensus was that Abu Nidal's security was more sophisticated than expected. His bodyguards were trained to recognize surveillance, to notice details that ordinary people overlooked. For 3 days, Abu Nidal remained at the villa, conducting his business through intermediaries. Mossad considered storming the location, but rejected the idea as too risky. Assaulting the villa would require a larger team, heavier weapons, and acceptance of potential civilian casualties if neighbors were involved. It would also create a diplomatic crisis Israel wanted to avoid. On June 30, intelligence intercepts revealed that Abu Nidal was preparing to leave Rome. His meetings had concluded successfully, and he had acquired weapons from the Italian dealers. He was scheduled to depart on July 2 on a flight to Tripoli. The window for action was closing. Then, fate provided an opportunity. Abu Nidal's Libyan contact invited him to attend a mass at St. Peter's Basilica on July 1. The invitation was unusual. Abu Nidal was a Muslim, and attending a Catholic mass served no obvious purpose. But the contact explained that several European businessmen who might be useful for future operations would be present, and the mass provided a neutral setting for introductions. St. Peter's Basilica presented extreme tactical problems. It was one of the most heavily secured places in Rome, with Vatican police, Italian security services, and constant crowds of tourists. Conducting an assassination inside the basilica was impossible, but the approach to St. Peter's through the colonnades of St. Peter's Square offered opportunities. The plan was refined again. Operatives would position themselves among the crowds on the square, blending in as priests visiting the Vatican. When Abu Nidal entered the square, they would approach him as if wanting to discuss a matter of mutual interest. At close range in the chaos of the crowd, they would fire silenced weapons and disappear into the mass of tourists and clergy before security could react. On the morning of July 1, the team assembled in St. Peter's Square. 5 operatives, all dressed in clerical garments, scattered among the colonnades. The 6th remained outside the square with a motorcycle positioned for emergency evacuation if needed. They waited. At 10:30 a.m., Abu Nidal arrived by taxi, not his usual Mercedes. He was accompanied by his Libyan contact and 1 bodyguard. They walked through the colonnades toward the basilica entrance, moving slowly through the pillars. A surveillance operative confirmed identification and transmitted. Target confirmed. The 2 hit operatives began closing in from their positions toward Abu Nidal. They moved casually, weaving through tourists. Their hands were inside their cassocks, gripping weapons. They were within 10 meters when Abu Nidal's bodyguard, scanning the crowd, made eye contact with one of the operatives. Something in that moment, a probe, an instinct honed by years of protecting high-value targets, made the bodyguard step between Abu Nidal and the approaching priests. The bodyguard spoke sharply in Arabic, warning Abu Nidal. The terrorist leader instantly turned and saw the 2 priests moving toward him with purposeful intent. He reacted immediately, grabbing his contact and pulling him toward the basilica entrance, using the crowd as cover. The bodyguard drew a pistol, causing immediate panic among tourists who screamed and scattered. The hit operatives had seconds to decide: open fire in the crowd and risk civilian casualties, or abort the operation and accept mission failure. The operatives holstered their weapons and melted into the panicking crowd. Vatican police responded within seconds, converging on the area where the bodyguard had drawn his weapon. But by the time they arrived, Abu Nidal had disappeared into the basilica, protected by the sanctuary of one of Catholicism's holiest sites. The operatives left the square in different directions, discarding their clerical robes in prearranged drop points and changing into tourist clothing. Abu Nidal remained inside the basilica for 3 hours, protected by Vatican police who had been informed of a security threat. Italian authorities negotiated his safe passage to the Libyan embassy, where diplomatic immunity protected him from arrest or action. He left Rome that evening on a Libyan diplomatic flight. Operation Divine Intervention was classified as a failure. Despite weeks of preparation and multiple attempts, Abu Nidal escaped. But the operation revealed something valuable. His security could be penetrated, his movements could be tracked, and his confidence in his invulnerability could be shaken. The exposure of the operation came through Italian media. Journalists tipped by Vatican sources reported that Israeli operatives disguised as priests had attempted an assassination in St. Peter's Square. The Italian government protested through diplomatic channels, demanding explanations. Israel issued denials, but the pattern was familiar: accusations without proof, protests without consequences. Within Mossad, the operation was subjected to thorough analysis. The clerical disguise had worked effectively for surveillance and positioning, but ultimately failed because Abu Nidal's security recognized the threat. The lesson learned was that disguises grant invisibility only up to the moment of action. Once weapons are drawn, once intent becomes visible, camouflage becomes irrelevant. Abu Nidal continued his terrorist operations for 2 more decades, protected by regimes that valued his services. He died in Baghdad in August 2002, officially by suicide, though many believe he was killed by Iraqi intelligence on Saddam Hussein's orders, when he became more a liability than an asset. The operatives who hunted him in Rome returned to Israel and resumed their classified work. Their names remain unknown. Their photographs appear in no public archive. The clerical robes they wore were destroyed. The weapons they carried were disposed of, and the operation they conducted exists only in sealed files, accessible to those with the highest security clearance. But the story endures as an example of how intelligence agencies operate in hostile environments, how operatives blend into landscapes through meticulous study and disciplined execution, and how even the most careful planning cannot guarantee success when targets are vigilant and luck is fickle. The priests who walked through Rome in the summer of 1982 were not priests at all. They were soldiers in an invisible war, hunting a man who had killed hundreds and would kill hundreds more. They failed to stop him that day, but they demonstrated something that intelligence services understand and terrorists must always fear: that no sanctuary is absolute, no protection perfect, and that the reach of those who seek them extends farther than they imagine, into cities they consider safe, into crowds they think provide cover, even into the shadow of the Vatican itself. If you were captivated by this glimpse into the shadowy world of espionage, please like this video to support our channel, subscribe for more deep dives into real historical operations, and share this story with others who appreciate the intricate dance of intelligence and counter-terrorism. Espionage. Please like this video to support our channel. Subscribe for more deep dives into real historical operations, and share this story with others who appreciate the intricate dance of intelligence and counterterrorism.